The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, and thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Allison Toll, and I'm happy to have you at the Low Emission Capacity Building Program and NewClimate Institute joint webinar on overcoming the challenges of INDC preparation, experiences and lessons learned. We will go ahead and there we go. So I'm just going to start with some content about what we're going to do in this webinar. The webinar will last 90 minutes, and we'll start with our first speaker who will provide an overview of UNDP support for intended nationally determined contributions. We'll then move to our second speaker who will provide us with a presentation on overcoming challenges of INDC preparation. And this will include an overview of the types and formats and common components of an INDC, technical considerations for INDC preparation, how to secure broad participation and support for the INDC, and a discussion about the new opportunities that have been brought to countries through the INDC preparation process. We will end the 90-minute webinar with a question and answer session where everybody will be provided the chance to speak directly to the two speakers to address any questions that you may have on the process of INDCs and the preparation and intent of them. So to begin, I would like to start with just a couple of housekeeping things so that everybody here on the webinar is able to use this platform to the best of their ability. So just an overview, while you're attending a webinar, all attendees are muted during the presentations, and this makes it such that we make sure that there's no background noise and that everyone can hear the presenter. If you experience any technical difficulties, or let's say that you can't hear the speaker, something in that nature, over on the right-hand side of your screen you have a control panel that is actually really, really helpful on this platform. If you look down at the bottom, there is a chat icon or a box. If you're having any trouble hearing the speaker or any problems, technical difficulties, please feel free to go ahead and enter something into the chat box, and that will come to me as the organizer, and I'll do my best to address the situation. On another note, like I said, at the end of this session we will have a question and answer session. Each attendee is given the opportunity to ask questions in two different ways. So you can do so by either raising your hand, which is just clicking on that hand icon on your right-hand panel. And this will allow me to know that you have a question, and I can unmute you, and you'll be able to speak directly to the entire audience and to the speaker, and they can speak back to you. Another option, if you don't want to use the raise your hand modality, is to just type your question into the question box. And what will happen is at the end of the presentations, all of those questions will come to us as the moderator, and we'll do our best to go through the questions and then direct them to the panelist that you're addressing the question. This entire session is being recorded, and the recording, as well as the presentations and the speaker bios, will be uploaded to the Low Emission Capacity Building website, and we will follow up with a message to all attendees linking to the presentations and the recordings so that you can also share among your networks if you would like to. So without further ado, because we want to get on to the meat of this webinar, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Yamil Bonduki. He is the manager of the UNDP Low Emission Capacity Building Program based in New York. This global program provides technical and financial assistance to 25 countries around the world for the preparation of nationally appropriate mitigation actions and low emission development strategies. He also oversees UNDP's technical assistance to developing countries for the preparation of their national communications and biennial update reports to the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, as well as the UNDP regional technical dialogues on intended nationally determined contributions, which is what our focus will will be today. Yamil holds a master's degree in city and regional planning from the University of California at Berkeley. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand the screen over to him so that he can begin his presentation. Yamil, please go ahead.
Thank you, Alison, and good morning, everyone. As Alison mentioned, I will briefly speak about the support that UNDP provides on INDCs. I'll talk a little bit also about the technical dialogues that the INDC technical dialogues that we had in the past 1.5 years, and some of the takeaway messages from the dialogues. Next, please. To begin with, just to provide you with a brief overview of the support at UNDP on INDCs, we have technical assistance and financial assistance to a number of countries. In the area of technical support, as mentioned before, through the low emission capacity building program, we provide direct and indirect support to countries. For direct support, we're assisting 25 countries on INDC preparation, and the indirect support is related to the work that the LECB program is providing in 25 countries, as I mentioned before, through the preparation of LEDs, NAMAs, and MRV. We look at this work directly linked to the INDC preparation, given that they provide not only technical inputs, but also the processes that countries have put in place to go through all this work that are part of the LECB projects in the countries. We have also carried out a number of technical dialogues on INDC at the regional and global level, and I will speak about that in the next slides or so. And we also have the Global Support Program that provides assistance for the preparation of national communications, PURs, and INDCs as well. The idea of making this linkage between these three substantive critical reports to the convention is because they are exactly related to each other in many ways, as I mentioned before, both at the technical and process level. And in that way, we're also facilitating the synergies among these different initiatives. In the area of financial assistance, UNDP has provided financial resources through funding received from the European Commission and GIZ and the GEF. And through this funding, we're supporting the preparation of 35 INDCs in developing countries. Next, please. I would also like to talk a little bit about, as part of the support by UNDP of the INDC guidance document that was developed by the World Resources Institute in collaboration with UNDP. And this guidance was in response to demands from participants of the regional technical dialogues. There was a need to, at the time we started the dialogues, in March or April of 2014, there was no clear guidance on the content and process for INDC. So through the discussion with the countries, with the participants in the dialogues, we were able to start identifying the key areas of the INDCs that should be described, developed in more detail for countries to have a common understanding of the INDC content and process. The guidance goes into some level of detail of the key technical elements that countries might want to consider when preparing the INDC, recognizing that there is not one single way of preparing these reports. Of course, a lot depends on capacities, national circumstances, the data that is available in the countries, but it tries to showcase some of the key steps and good practices that we have learned through the dialogues and more recently through the INDCs that have been submitted to the Secretariat. Is meant not to be prescriptive, and as a result, countries might decide to use it in the way that they feel is more appropriate for them. It considers what the decisions that were made at COP20 in Lima, especially as you may recall, COP20 also included the option for countries to address adaptation in their INDCs, and now the guidance is also available in Spanish and French, apart from English. Next, please. I think we're having some small delays. And just to give you a brief overview about the technical dialogues, these and probably a number of you who are participating in the call at the moment participated in some of these dialogues. It was carried out in collaboration with the UNFCCC Secretariat of the WRI. And the main objective was basically to start discussing at that time what is involved in INDC preparation, what are the key aspects that countries will address in the preparation of the INDCs, what are the gaps and technical assistance needs. We received the countries from a number of donors that are included in this slide, and through the technical dialogues we organized 7 regional workshops plus a global workshop that are listed in the slides. I just want to say that all the presentations and meeting reports are available also in the LECB website that we will provide later on for you to access if you wish. Next one. In terms of the upcoming support, we are currently in the process of organizing INDC trainings that especially focused on LDCs and SIDS. The first one for Francophone Africa just finished yesterday, and we are holding 2 trainings, one for Anglophone Africa and the Pacific Islands. All of these trainings will be completed before the 1st of October deadline for submission for those countries that would like to have their INDCs reflected in the UNFCCC Secretariat summary that they will be preparing. In all, approximately 1,000 participants would have participated in all the dialogues and training activities that we have organized. We're still in process of finalizing. And just to add that we are collaborating with the European Union in the organization of INDC Global Forum that will take place in mid-October in Morocco. Next, please. And just to finalize before passing the floor to Nicholas, I wanted to highlight some of the key messages that came out of the dialogues. I think Nicholas will go into more detail of these messages in his presentation. But one of the things that was very clear from the beginning of the discussion is that the types and scope of the contribution will be based on the national priorities. And this is something that was not only reiterated, but it was identified as a key condition for INDC to make sense in the context of national development. In order also to build trust, there was the need to identify from the beginning who will lead the INDC process, who will be the policy and sectoral experts, what kind of teams will have to be put in place, and very importantly, what kind of stakeholder consultation will happen to ensure that there is support, government support, and also enough trust among the key partner institutions that eventually will be responsible for implementing the INDCs. Critical elements also of this report is ensuring that there is a coherent message in which ideally a long-term vision would be presented in order to link it with in order to link the climate actions with the development plans in the longer term at the country level. Co-benefits was considered a critical part of the prioritization process in order to ensure that the contributions are rooted in the priorities, whether they're the national development plans or sectoral plans. balance. And one of the challenges that were identified was, given that there was a very short time to prepare the INDCs, is how to strike a balance between the information, solid information that will be needed, how you link it with the political processes in the countries, how to make sure that you are putting forward goals that are realistic in the context of what the countries could actually achieve with own and additional resources to make sure that the contribution, the report itself was as realistic as possible. And in doing so, how to prioritize on the basis of the highest implementation and impact potential to avoid that dispersion of the different contributions that are being put forward. And finally, the resources that will be needed. There has been a lot of debate about what countries could implement with own resources and what additional support will be needed in order to implement the INDCs to make them as ambitious as possible. With this, I would like to pass the floor to Nicholas for the core of this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Emil. Before we pass the floor, I would just like to take a moment to introduce our next speaker. Next speaker is Dr. Nicholas Hohn. He is the founding partner of the NewClimate Institute. He is also an associate professor at Wageningen University, which he will correct the pronunciation of in a moment, I'm sure. Since 1995, he has led numerous studies related to the international climate change negotiations and national climate policies. For example, several evaluations of countries' performance in climate change. Nicholas is also the lead author for the IPCC 4th and 5th assessment report for the chapter on climate policies and international cooperation. And he's also the lead author of the UNEP emissions gap reports 2010 to 2014. He created the Climate Action Tracker, which tracks commitments and actions of countries on climate change, and he holds a PhD from the University of Utrecht for his dissertation on what is next after the Kyoto Protocol. At this time, I'd like to pass the floor to Dr. Hohn so that he can go ahead and deliver his presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present this work here. I hope you can see my screen now and hear me well. This is some information that we've collected during a project for UNDP and UNFCCC on overcoming the challenges of the preparation of INDCs. And yeah, this is experience that we've collected from this process of preparing INDCs. And we, in the project, hope to turn it into then lessons and some guidance on how to overcome these challenges. In general, that's clear. We have several challenges ahead of us. One big challenge is definitely to get this global and ambitious international climate agreement. But underneath that, there is, for each nation, the challenge of developing the intended nationally determined contribution that should feed into that global agreement. And that basically has to happen now, or has to be finalized now or soon. And the idea was of this project and the outputs of this project and the presentation here is to enable knowledge sharing and peer-to-peer learning from this process and help countries that are still in the process of preparing and submitting their INDC to have some help and see what others are doing and to identify what good practices are and to find out how the different countries have overcome the challenges. What did we do? We first collected information on an online survey and with detailed interviews. So we have some high-level questions from around 125 countries and some more detailed information from 44 countries. And then analyze that information in a bit more detail, and that's the output here. And then there's still some knowledge sharing activities, and this presentation is one of them. At the end, this presentation will be shared on the UNDP website, on the events page there. The presentation includes more slides and also more notes, so it's more a presentation report where a lot of information that I'll talk about, but even more will be included. And the idea is to freely share that information and to use it in whatever format. And we thought a presentation report, so to say, a report in presentation format is the most useful at this point in time, where time is of essence and that people can freely use the outputs here. First of all, where are we with INDC submitted? We did this interview, asked, in this case, 125 countries. They would submit their INDC. On the left-hand side, you see the number of countries that plan to submit at a certain date. Well, we started in March. That was the first time when we did it. And up till August, that is, or up till July, actually, that is real data. And as of August, September, October is data from the survey. So we see that quite a lot of countries have come in so far. But we really expect a wave of INDCs coming in September, just in time to be included in the summary report from the UNFCCC Secretariat. And the cutoff date there is the 1st of October. So if one has submitted by 1st of October, one will be included in this report. And as a result of that, it seems that many countries are now, that haven't submitted yet, are at least planning to submit by September. On the right-hand side, you can see the proportion of global emissions covered by INDCs. We had just about 30% in March, when the first deadline was that countries should strive towards submitting something by the end of March. That covered then around 30% of global emissions. We are currently at 60% of global emissions with the submissions received. And the expectation is that that rises to 66 by the end of the month, which is fastly approaching, then to around 76 by the end of September, and then hopefully in the order of 80–90% by the end of October, so that very good coverage, global coverage of submissions is reached by the end, to that then form an input to the discussions in Paris. So that means we have 22 submissions, and one submission of that is of the EU of 28 states. So there's roughly 50 countries, 50 parties which have put in information. And from that, we are drawing some lessons, but also from these interviews with countries. And these interviews were with 44 countries, which answered more detailed questions. And some questions were around challenges, and they identified these 5 major challenges. And you see here these bars. They basically say whether we asked the countries, whether, or the country representatives, whether they agree or disagree with these statements. And in red, you see those, the share of those that responded that they strongly agree, and light red that they agree. And on the left-hand side in gray, you see that they strongly disagree or somewhat disagree. And from that, if you add somewhat agree and the strongly agree, then you find that, well, an overwhelming majority of them think that the timing is too short. That's definitely a challenge. And second challenge then is the lack of certainty of what is to be included in the INDC. Then it comes to expertise of assessing mitigation options, then securing high-level political support, and as a fifth challenge, highest on the list, we find a lack of understanding in other sectors or ministries. So those are the challenges that countries mentioned as being very important. Next one is that they also see a lot of opportunities. And that is, again, it's the same with strongly agree and somewhat agree. And the opportunities that are highest ranked in the questionnaires were improved international communication, so that the the work that is being done in the country is good communicated to the outside. Enhanced engagement of stakeholders in climate change planning. So the deadline apparently has created some enhanced stakeholder engagement. Acceleration of national processes, improved national processes, and improved domestic communication between governments and civil society and the public. So it's not only challenges that come with the preparation process of INDCs, there's also a lot of opportunities and positive things that can be taken away from it that are in addition to the INDC document at the end. There's these opportunities, they will stay, the improved stakeholder engagement, that's a sustainable output of this INDC preparation process. Now, what we wanted to do here in the project is to be positive and look forward and transform the challenges into lessons learned and experiences. So the 5 challenges we grouped in these 3 categories. So, and the first one is what to include in an INDC and see from what the countries have submitted so far, what could be, how an INDC could look like. Second is how to mitigate limited capacity, and that relates to the 2 challenges of limited expertise and short time frames. And the third one is how to secure broad participation and support, and that's related to the challenges of securing high-level political support and lack of understanding. Then the opportunities we grouped under section 4, the benefits gained from the INDC process. What I will do now in the rest of the presentation is go through these 4 elements and show to you the insights that we've gained, mainly from the country experiences. So where have we found good examples of countries that have overcome these challenges so that these the methods and tools that the countries have used can then be used by others to overcome the same challenges. That was the idea. Basically looking what countries have done, how they have overcome with the challenges, and hope that this helps other countries to do the same. Now, first one, what to include in the INDCs. And the more INDCs we have, I think the more clarity we get on what is in the INDCs. First of all, we see, if you see here on the right-hand side, what kind of countries have submitted INDCs. It's still OECD country heavy, so to say. Quite a lot of OECD countries have submitted, and we're still waiting for a lot of non-OECD countries. And I think that is a reflection then on the left-hand side, what types of contributions are the major contribution of the INDC. And you see here in red on the left-hand side, economy-wide greenhouse gas reduction targets. By base year is the largest share, but I think that is heavily driven by the fact that these are mainly OECD countries. We also have reduction targets economy-wide below BAU, that's the second largest. We have some sectoral targets, we have some decarbonization indicators, and we also have policies and measures as types of contributions, but not necessarily as the highest, the most prominent element of the INDC. I would expect, and that's also reflected in the questionnaires, that countries expect to present a very wide variety, and what we've seen on the left-hand side of the existing contributions will not reflect what we will see hopefully by the end of September or the end of October, with a very, very wide spectrum of types of contributions, including many that plan to present policies and measures, including many that present long-term goals in addition to their short-term activities. But, well, this is what we have right now, and this is what we can work with. The second question is the format of the INDCs. There's different elements here on the slide that countries have thought of. Many actually have summarized the INDC as a one-sentence summary. That's easier for the developed countries, which just put forward a target, so to say, an emission reduction target that's easily summarized in one sentence. That's a bit more complicated for sectoral or policy type contributions, and I would expect that if we have more of those, then the one sentence summary doesn't really do the job. There's other countries which look at wide definitions of the methodologies and reference points and coverage. I think another one that I would want to highlight is the long-term goals as one element of the INDC. That is definitely something that some countries have put in there. Some countries think about the legislative planning process. Also an important element if one thinks of whether an INDC is in the end likely to be implemented or not. If the country presents the legislative planning process, then there can be some assessment, at least, whether one thinks that that will be implemented in the end. Several countries speak about fairness, ambition, and convention objective, and I'll come to that later in the presentation. I think an important element is whether there's an additional conditional contribution, so a contribution that is conditional to often financing. That has happened only for a few countries for now, and I would assume that a lot more countries will choose that option. And finance requirements, and also one big question is whether the adaptation component is included, and I'll come to more details there a bit later as well. That is here, and that is on adaptation. How have different countries have included adaptation in their INDC? On the bottom, you see some developed countries examples. On the top, you see the developing country examples. On the right-hand side, you see where the focus is. Definitely still on most, it is on mitigation, but some it's half-half, and some it's really adaptation. The format that countries use is, in some cases, a separate chapter in their INDC text. In some cases, they refer to a different document or to a different annex. And the types of elements that have been included there are very diverse. It's about adaptation plans, it's about long-term adaptation goals, it's about sector-specific goals, so quite diverse elements that the countries have included as adaptation INDCs. But for those that still don't know what to do, I think this overview is interesting to see, and one can check with the countries that have submitted an adaptation element to see whether that's useful and a good model for their own country's INDC submission. There's now quite a lot of guidance on what to put in an INDC and help with the process. I think the most recent one is the UNDP guide that Jamil has already talked about. Second one is mitigation of limited capacities. So the two barriers, just to repeat, were limited technical expertise and short time frames. And that is probably really, after the first one, after knowing what's in the INDC, that's definitely the major challenge. And here we look at 5 different elements on the bottom that are sub areas of this question. So first we look at what have countries done to determine the sectoral scope. Second, then how to build on existing knowledge, because if knowledge is already available, it can be done quite quicker. Third one is looking at the co-benefits that inform the design of the INDC. A fourth one is what have countries done to look into the conditional and unconditional contributions, how to do the split. And fifth one is about best practices in assessing equity and ambition of the individual INDC. So I'll go through these 5 now. First one is how to determine the sectoral scope. And definitely it's acknowledged that not all countries will have the capacity to determine an economy-wide contribution in this first round. And if that's the case, then one has to do a sectoral prioritization, which should be the sectors where one should focus on. And that can help then with the limited capacity and the limited time. Focus on the most important sectors and leave the other sectors for later, and at least to get something for the most important sectors. So that would be the way forward here. And what are potential criteria for sector selection? Definitely it's on the left-hand side here, or the middle of this picture, the potential impact and emission reduction potentials or other co-benefits. But on the right-hand side, there's also other criteria which help you to be faster, and that is where, for example, there's common mitigation and adaptation goals, where it fits with national priorities, and where it fits with other national climate change processes. So already sectors where there is already some work done where it fits with national priorities, and that then basically helps to do this a little bit faster. Second one is building on existing knowledge. On the left-hand side, you see here what countries in our larger survey, there are 44 countries survey, said which existing material forms the basis of their INDC, and many, or if not all countries, said their national greenhouse gas inventory. Definitely the national communication. Some countries have LEDs, so low emission development strategies. They definitely are essential input. Some countries mentioned the NAMAs that they have created and developed national actions, mitigation actions, and finally CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, is also one important input that countries have used. So if one has them, then that is very useful. And the links of the INDC can basically link all of these national processes. Let me give you 3 examples here. One is the Dominican Republic. They were basically able to build upon existing data and processes. They already have, on the right-hand side here, you can see they have an interministerial coordination already set up, which they used for this process. They had a legal framework from the development strategy, and they had a framework for action from the climate compatible development plan. And on the left-hand side, you see how that all was put together. On the bottom there, the low emission development strategy, and then taking into account their national communication and biennial update reports. And all of that led into the INDC coordinated by this council. So they were in the fortunate position to have all of this available. Similar country is Peru, which had a lot of activities. They have included here the NAMAs that they have developed. They have a comprehensive LEDs and mitigation potential analysis, their MAPS project or Plan CC. They have the biennial and reports. They have separate activities on forests and also plans and programs. And they put all of that together and identified from all of these documents 58 mitigation actions. And from those, they came up with a proposal, a 31 reduction below BAU. And that is currently in their consultation process, or that has ended, and now they're finalizing the INDC, hopefully submitted still by the end of the month. And the last example is Indonesia, where we found a quote here that they're saying that the INDC of Indonesia is actually a byproduct of their mitigation policy review process. So that actually is a very example where there is already an existing process which is about evaluating the policy, reviewing it, and then revising it. That's a continuous process, and the INDC is simply one of the elements within that. And if a country is in a fortunate position to have that process, a continuous process, then preparing the INDC seems to be definitely easier and also integrated in the national context. A third one is about co-benefits, and the idea here is that co-benefits, the assessment of the co-benefits can help in the design of the INDC. This is an example here of a separate study that was not for the INDCs but separate. We're looking at energy security, so reduced fossil fuel imports, for example, health benefits, reduced air pollution, or job creation, but also traffic congestion or other economic development. These usually seem to be good arguments to then also get to a comprehensive and ambitious INDC, and may also increase the willingness of the stakeholders to agree and to push for something. One example that we can show here is Dominican Republic. In their INDC and the related documents, one can see that they have looked into detail into job creation, economic impacts, and greenhouse gas reductions. And the economic impacts and the job creation seem to have been an important driver of their INDC development. And it's encouraging to see that countries use that kind of analysis to inform the INDC and help to make it comprehensive and ambitious. The fourth element that we put on the table is this definition or split between conditional and unconditional. What does a country put forward unconditional, so with own financing or existing external financing? And is there an additional level that countries could do with additional financing? And, two examples here on the slide. The slide is to show here the final emission level in 2025 or 2030, and it's probably higher in the unconditional case. In the case of Ecuador, it's the unconditional is certain measures that have been identified in this exercise supported by UNDP. And in the case of Morocco, it's 10 measures in place that have been identified and are now in implementation through the third national communication. And then on the bottom, both countries propose to do additional things subject to financing. On the right-hand side, Morocco says they can do 54 additional measures. They were also identified in the national communication, but additional measures subject to financing, and they also provide a figure on how much investments are needed for these measures to happen. And on the left-hand side, Ecuador says, well, the CDM project and the whole pipeline, well, they basically will only happen if there is financing available and that the CDM credits will in the end be bought by somebody, and that's a equal or additional or a different way to show that this is conditional to financing. Then a last one is ambition and equity in INDCs. What have countries done to explain that their INDC is ambitious and equitable? This is an overview table to give you a quick glance of what kind of arguments countries have used in their INDC submission. It's limited because we don't have that many submissions yet, but it's interesting to see what countries have used here. Well, on the left-hand side, first you see many countries have said their INDC is in line with IPCC trajectories, so they've compared it to other trajectories that are available outside. Some have said it's ambitious because it's in line with their long-term target, and the long-term target in these two cases, US and EU, is what they say is ambitious. It's quite low, it's minus 80% by 2050, and their short-term targets in line with the long-term target, and that's why they say it's equitable and ambitious. Then quite a few countries say it's ambitious because it's a deviation from the trend. It's a step change. It's something really new. It has not happened before. It's something in addition. And that already makes it then ambitious. Many mention per capita emissions as an important criterion. either where they are right now, relatively low, or where they plan to be in the future, reducing their per capita emissions. Some countries mention that they are only a very small contribution to the global total, which for those small countries seems to be an important argument. Some countries mention reductions of emissions per GDP. That's basically the argument of decoupling growth with emissions. So growth is going up, emissions are going down. And the last one is mentioned in the peak year when per capita emissions have peaked. In the case of the EU, their per capita emissions have peaked already in the past and are going down for quite some time, and that's what they mention as an important element. So maybe this helps as an indication for other countries to see how they could use it. I want to show one more example, and that's that of Chile. Chile had also the benefits of a large exercise from MAPS, and in MAPS they look at not only the future emissions and emission reduction potential, they also have looked at a scenario that they call required by science. And that's basically a scenario that shares the effort of reductions across different countries according to some criterion of equity. But at least it's one way of the INDC discussion. And it's shown here in the national documents always as this one scenario required by science, and it's basically stable and then going down. It's interesting to see here that it has received limited attention in the beginning, that in this case, kind of the people involved were very much interested in the reduction potential, so what can be done really bottom up, and some kind of a top-down required by science was not so interesting. But now that there is a draft INDC, it's compared to this required by science scenario. Maybe this comparison can then, still in the final phases of putting the INDC forward, can maybe nudge the INDC a little bit further in a certain. Coming to the second or the third element here, securing broader support. How can that be done? This relates to the last two challenges, that's securing high-level political support and lack of understanding. And here we have three areas on how to help. How have countries obtained high-level support and benefit from it? How to ensure the interministerial coordination and what is good practice in stakeholder consultations. I think these are the three elements that are important here. And high-level support. One element is, we again ask these 44 countries, what's the sign-off level of the INDC? How high is the INDC embedded in the national process, and who's signing off? In top left, you see here in this pie chart, 1/4 basically of the INDCs will be signed off by heads of state and parliament. So that's really the highest level. Then you see a significant share here, 41% is then signed off by a minister. And taking this together, so 3/4 have received a relatively high level of sign-off, which is, I think, encouraging, because that high level of sign-off then ensures that it at least has, at that point in time, political support to be implemented afterwards. So countries are taking this really serious. I would read from this result that countries taking it serious and taking it to high level, or even the highest level of their country, of their legislative system for the sign-off. That's very encouraging. The second one is how to ensure or cross-ministerial coordination. And we've seen that that is definitely a challenge to engage all of the different governmental bodies. We quote here on the right-hand side Georgia, which has been able to create an interministerial steering committee, and that has really helped them to steer the process. general things that countries have done is, well, either to form a new body or use an existing one that is already there. If they don't have it, then they have formed a new one. Or they have distributed key responsibilities between the ministries, which helps to see who's responsible in the end. And finally, there's intensive training of those involved that take the decisions in the end, so that one can be ensured that this process works well. Those were the few things that countries have done to ensure cross-ministerial coordination. What about good practice in INDC stakeholder consultations? And I want to show two examples here where the stakeholder consultation has led to really new insights, something that was not known before. And we can see that basically all countries do the stakeholder consultations. That is also encouraging to see. All countries take it serious and go through that process. Two examples here. One is Singapore. They have particularly focused on the private sector, and through that process have gained knowledge that they had not had before on different reduction options, for example. And this process really helped them to shape the INDC, because there was in the industry community information about where emissions could be reduced that was not available before. Armenia did a completely different thing. They involved the general public, and they, you can see here, they had a public opinion survey first, really professionally organized through a media outlet. They've organized roundtables with senior government officials and broadcasted these to the general public. So a very, very open and inclusive process where really there was an interaction with the general public, and apparently also helped significantly to shape the INDC. Then I come to the last section, which is the opportunities, and we have seen that several opportunities exist from the INDC preparation process, and the topics that we want to cover here is, first of all, developing the national climate agenda. Where has that happened? And where has the INDC preparation process improved the data collection and coordination of information? So for the first one, the national processes, we can see that the national processes have been consolidated. We see that, for example, here one example is Senegal, where many different processes have happened. You had the NAPs, the technology need assessments, you had the low emission development strategies, you had NAMAs, TDM, and you had national policies. And now the INDC process has consolidated all of this information into one strategy document. So in this case, the deadline and the pressure of having to submit an INDC has really led to a consolidation of the existing processes. Same for the Dominican Republic. It builds on already existing processes under this committee with a long acronym, sorry for that. It's this coordination committee, the NAMAs, the Nationally Appropriate Mitigation Actions, and the CDM. And the countries have felt that this really is an efficiency gain, improving the synergies and putting all of these processes together. So that helped significantly. Second one is an acceleration of existing climate change processes. Many countries had these processes in the pipeline. They were going, some faster, some slower. And again, the INDC deadline led to the fact countries, like 75% of the respondents, said that this really has happened. It has accelerated significantly what they've been doing. For example, existing processes were not completed, but because of this, they were completed to be ready in time to input to the INDC. In Georgia, they completed their LETS process, and it has given renewed priority to get it done and to have it ready for the INDC design. In Armenia, it increased the attention for these activities. The relationship and common understanding was accelerated. And the last one in Thailand, it said that the INDC process provided some stimulus not only to INDC, but also to other processes outside related. For example, now that this INDC process has happened, it has created a positive political environment about other areas that also have to be developed. So the main point is that here it created the national climate change processes. And the last one, it has mainstreamed climate policy. That's a bit of a different thing. Now that this process has happened, there is many ministries now involved and informed about the climate change policy process, which has not happened before. Many ministries that were a bit further away from climate change policies have now the knowledge and have been engaged and have taken on responsibilities which they had not taken on before. Again, examples we had here, Georgia with the interministerial process and Thailand as well, where now the different ministries are involved in these activities. The second element of opportunities is improved data collection and coordination of information. We see a few countries that have, because of the INDC process, streamlined the data collection exercises and the processes. Senegal, for example, has a new climate change data office. Costa Rica expanded its national registry. Ghana has an online climate change data hub, and Philippines has a climate change database. So these are just examples where data collection efforts were underway and have been accelerated or even started and implemented because of this INDC preparation process. And the last one on data collection and coordination is South-South cooperation. There's a lot of interesting and encouraging examples of countries starting explicitly on South-South cooperation. Chile, for example, increased the consultations that they have with other developing country governments. And Morocco is developing a competence center for South-South cooperation as well. So that's, again, an encouraging thing to see that this cooperation among peers is really increased through the INDC preparation process. So with that, I end and show this slide here on the different elements that we looked at. We looked at what to include in an INDC and showed what countries have done so far. We looked at what are options to mitigate limited capacity and showed a few things how countries can overcome that challenge. We looked at broad participation and support, and finally we looked at what benefits have been gained from the INDC process. And as I said at the beginning, this whole presentation and background documentation material will be available on the website of this webinar and also on the NewClimate website and other websites. So all of that information will be freely available, and please use it. And with that, I close and look forward to the questions. Alison.
Great, thank you, Nicholas, for such a comprehensive and interesting presentation. I'm going to go ahead and just take the screen back and take this opportunity to turn to the attendees who are here on the webinar. This is now opening the part of the webinar that's the open discussion and question and answer session. And just to remind our audience, there are two different ways that you can engage. The first way is, if you would like to, you can type your question into the question box over on the right-hand side in your control panel. And another option is that you can click that little hand icon and just raise your hand, and that signifies to me that you have a question that you would like answered, and I can go ahead and unmute your microphone and allow you to speak directly to the organizers to ask any questions that you may have. So just to start out, over the course of the presentation, we've already received a number of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and just put these out to the panelists. I'm going to start off with one from our colleague Vinay, who asks, barring a few INDCs submitted so far, none of the developed countries have considered using international market mechanisms. Does this signify an end to any meaningful carbon market, including CDM? And I'd like to point that question to Nicholas, if you could go ahead and weigh in on that before I go on to any other questions.
I would agree that the current information in the INDC documents does not cover market mechanisms to a large extent. I think Japan, for example, is quite clear that they do want to use them in a certain way. And I would assume that the EU would use some under certain conditions as well. I think also that this is still an option to be discussed from now until December. That particular option of the use of market mechanisms could be one thing that is part of the discussions now, and one way of increasing the ambition of the INDCs. One could imagine, for example, that in these discussions now countries come forward and say, okay, I can increase the ambition by a certain amount if there is the opportunity to do this through international market mechanisms, and then rules should be developed at a later date. But I think the verdict is not yet there. There's still room for including market mechanisms. But we'll see how the discussions go.
Great, thank you, Nicholas. And now I'd like to kind of go to a more open-ended question that I think many of us are thinking about. And this question was submitted by a colleague, Prakiti. And the question is, how realistic should the contribution be? There's the possibility for countries to commit a lot based on conditional commitments. I'd like to address this first to Yamil and then actually have Nicholas weigh in. I think there are a lot of questions surrounding exactly what these commitments mean and where we go from here. Yamil?
Thank you, Alison. Actually, this question has come up in the technical dialogues a few times, and one of the answers that had been provided through the discussion is that in determining how ambitious a country can be, the country should perhaps start by looking at how much realistically the country can do in the first place with own resources. And with own resources meaning not necessarily allocating huge amounts of new funding for just climate mitigation activities, for example, but looking at what the country is already planning to put in place in terms of measures that will have an impact on GHG emissions in the future, and will be able to bring those measures into the contributions in such a way that they are, when we talk about how realistic they are, they're embedded into the plans and processes that countries have established. And then on that, how much additional resources countries, national governments could add to these existing plans and processes to enhance the support to those measures, to expand it, for instance, bringing some pilot initiative to bigger efforts that can still be afforded at the national level. In doing so, there's also been discussion that the participation of, for example, the Ministry of Finance is critical to make sure that whatever countries is planning to submit as unconditional contribution is realistic in terms of budgeting planning in the short and the longer term. And then there was the discussion about, so if I want to be more ambitious around the lines of what Nicholas mentioned before, what additional measures can be included that still are achievable, not necessarily because of lack of technologies, etc., but they are achievable in general if additional resources were to be provided. And in some cases, as Nicholas mentioned in his presentation, countries have deliberately made a distinction between the unconditional contributions, and they have actually measured the impacts of those unconditional contributions in terms of GHG emission, and then added the conditional contribution to demonstrate how much farther a country can go in terms of reducing GHG emission in a given time period. So it's a very political decision in many ways, but it's also, I would say, a thorough planning exercise in terms of determining how much a country could commit in terms of conditional versus unconditional contributions. Nicholas, I don't know if you would like to add anything.
Things exactly along the same lines. For most developing countries, there could be the unconditional contribution, which is clear how much can be done based on a bottom-up effort. But there could also be this conditional contribution, and the country can set their own conditions. But that one, I think, can and should be visionary or ambitious, or you could even call it unrealistic. Really going the extra step, showing that, well, it can be done, at least the willingness that this can be done. And even if one doesn't know how exactly it can be done, one could say, this is the direction we want to go. An example is 100% renewable energies or electricity supply. That kind of a goal would be great to have in an INDC for a country, conditional to help, definitely, that's very clear. But it would be an ambitious and long-term and visionary goal, and that would then also help other countries to provide additional support for these countries. One last thing is the political element here, and there it's definitely a question when and how one should come forward with the ambition level of the INDC. Should one wait and do gaming, only propose a little bit and then have a little bit of room in the discussions to put a bit more on the table? You can argue whether that's the right strategy or not. The history showed that at least once a number is out, it's very difficult to change and to increase the ambition afterwards. For the Copenhagen pledges, countries have put forward these pledges, and basically once it was out, it was never changed. It never was increased to be more ambitious. So that's an important consideration one has to make if one wants to play the ambition level on the political level or not.
Thank you both for that. We have a couple of hands raised, so I'm going to try out this modality. I'd first like to invite our attendee, Tobias Fritz, who I'm going to unmute you right now, Tobias. If you want to go ahead and just address your question to either of the panelists.
Thank you very much. I would like to follow up on the initial question that was raised on the consideration of market mechanisms in INDCs. Apparently there's a lot of uncertainty of how to include, especially when it comes to the conditionality of including markets into INDCs, of if there are experiences so far with countries engaging to include CDM or in general market mechanisms into their INDCs, and what were the barriers that they encountered, and maybe have a analysis of why that hasn't happened so far.
Thank you, Tobias. Yamil, Nicholas, do you have anything that you want to respond to that?
Yeah, Nicholas here. Yeah, thanks for the question. Indeed, it's a very undecided question. There is the call for having more market mechanisms. I think there's a few countries which really want to have it. But on the other hand, there's no demand for emission reduction credits under such a market mechanism. Or the INDCs, the current INDCs that we have, there's no clear indication of how high the demand will be. And so it's really a chicken and egg problem. And that's why I think this is still part of the future negotiations to see how that can be changed. I think the developing countries have different opportunities here as receiving support. Right now, it was, in the beginning, it was a lot of CDM. Then it moved a bit to the nationally appropriate mitigation actions, which are not market-based, mainly. Some are, but the main understanding of NAMAS is that it's not market-based, that there's upfront financing or financing in between, but not for a ton of CO2, but for an activity that's happening. And that seems to be very attractive for the individual countries. That's why the appetite for really going for market mechanisms and a ton of CO2 that is traded is right now. I think what I think right now is the one model that could be somewhere in between is results-based financing, and that is financing for a particular result, and the result doesn't have to be a ton of CO2. It can also be a gigawatt installed or a certain policy implemented, but I think that could be one way of combining the two worlds of the market mechanisms with the one ton, and on the other hand, the direct financing that people see under NAMAS.
Thank you. We had some responses from countries that would wish to include market mechanisms as a clear indication of their will to use the existing structures in place and to build momentum in the climate negotiations through the inclusion in the INDCs. Is that something that you see feasible or fit to do, to be included in the INDC to build political momentum in the negotiations?
Yeah, definitely. The countries that still have to come should basically say in the INDCs, yes, we want to do market mechanisms and we are ready to do it. And by that show other countries that there needs to be a demand for it, and that hopefully then helps the negotiations, and that in the end that there is supply from the countries who want to do it and demand from the countries that want to then in the end buy these allowances. So it's very important that countries do this, what you described.
All right, thank you.
Thank you both. So I'm going to go back to a question that is posed to both of the panelists. We have a couple of other hands raised, so I'll be coming to Carmen right after this question that I'm going to go ahead and pose to the presenters. It's directed at both of you, and the question is from Agatha, and it says, while we have seen that the highest levels of government are involved to sign off on INDCs, have any of you seen interest from nations to include subnational governments in the consultation process and the development of INDCs, considering the significant role that these levels of government would play in implementing the INDCs? If not, do you have an interpretation of why? And I'd like to first position this, or propose this question to Yamil, because through the technical dialogues, of which he's been present at most of them, I think that he has a great deal of experience to kind of come back with on this question, and then we'll hand it over to Nicholas. Yamil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alison. Yes, and very important question as well. Yeah, one of the, I would say, the key limitation to involving a subnational level in the INDC process has been the time frame that was mentioned earlier, given that countries will not only need to bring all the information together into a coherent document, but actually do so in consultation with what we call the key stakeholders. And the key stakeholders in countries, of course, vary a lot. But the subnational level in a few of the countries, from the discussions also in the dialogues, had been mentioned to be relevant stakeholders in this process, because ultimately a lot of the contributions that are being put forward in the documents are to be if they are to be implemented, it will happen, a lot of them at the subnational level, in which they will have to take responsibility for investments, actions on the ground, etc. Through the consultation process, I'm aware that a few countries have involved them. I will just mention the case of Chile, because they had a very open consultation platform in which everybody could contribute, which is a great initiative to make it as inclusive as possible, but also through specifically targeting some of the subnational level stakeholders to make sure that inputs are provided at the right time, and their concerns are also taken into account. But I would say that the greatest challenge is to coordinate all these inputs and views in such a short time, sometimes also with conflicting views and interests.
Nicholas, did you want to weigh in on that at all, or shall I go to the next question?
I can just quickly say that in the slide in the presentation that I didn't show, we looked at countries and who they include in their stakeholder consultations, and Uganda and Kenya would be examples where they have included local and regional governments. So they definitely see that this is very important.
Great, thank you. Next, I'm going to go back out to the audience, and we have a colleague on the line named Carmen who would like to pose a question, I think, about SDGs. And this is a question in various forms that has come through the question panel. So I think that it's coming from a number of people, and would be great if we could address it. Carmen, your mic is unmuted, and you can please go ahead and pose your question.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I wanted to ask if there is any experience or suggestions on how to link the INDCs with the SDGs, because we are aware that this process should help raise the ambition. And I don't know how we're seeing this at a global level with the national commitments. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Nicholas, did you want to go ahead and address that first?
Yeah, I would cover that under what I called co-benefits, or benefits of the INDCs that are other than reducing greenhouse gas emissions, so development benefits. And there we see that in the discussions of the INDCs in the different countries, those are the driving arguments that really help countries to move things forward. It's not reducing emissions, and it's not climate, it's all the other things. So that way one could indeed include in the INDC these other benefits, and in following your suggestion, linking them directly to the Sustainable Development Goals, and therefore create synergies between these two processes. And that's definitely one way one can raise the ambition there.
Thank you.
Can I add something, Alison, to this?
Please, Emil. Yes.
Yes, no, I will. Yeah, this is exactly a very good point, Nicholas. We will just add that, and we keep repeating this message, is that the INDC is just the beginning of a long-term process. So the fact that a given country might not have the time to actually have looked at the linkage with the Sustainable Development Goals in a meaningful way while preparing the INDC, what comes after is going to be as relevant as, or if not even more important, the actual INDC process. And given that now the 17 SDG and the UN framework has been basically agreed, I think after Paris, once all these rushes already in the past, I think countries will then have an opportunity to sit down with more time and more thoughts about then how, if we are to implement what we have communicated in the contributions, how we start making the necessary linkage to make sure that the contributions make sense in the context of development and the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you, Yamil. I think that's actually a great segue into some of the questions that are coming through. And more specifically, a colleague, Alejandra, asked the questions, can the INDC process continue during 2016 and before 2020 in order to enhance national commitments? So I know that Nicholas has said that it's, you know, once the INDC is submitted, there's less probability of kind of changing the numbers, but there, as you've just mentioned, Yamil, clearly a lot of work that needs to take place between 2016 and before 2020. Can you speak just a little bit in terms of what is expected after Paris and how these will become operational and how the commitments will be enforced? Yamil or Nicholas?
Nicholas, you want to start? Yes.
Happy to do that. Yeah, so what I said is in the negotiation process towards Paris, there I was reluctant whether the numbers, once they are on the table and agreed at highest political level, whether they would then change. We are still hopeful that this happens, but one has to see. Once the INDCs are in and hopefully we'll get a climate agreement in Paris, then they will be anchored in some way in the agreement, inscribed somewhere. And it's still likely that if you add all of them up, then the ambition level may not be sufficient to what's necessary to achieve the ultimate objective of the convention. And that's why many think that there should be a continuous revision process or ratcheting up process or ambition process after Paris from 2020 to onwards, basically, where the INDCs are revised and reviewed and maybe improved and ratcheted up or increased in stringency. The nationally determined contribution, so a country can, within, as we've seen for Indonesia, with the continuous revision process of their national plans, they can then most likely resubmit their INDC and say, hey, we have reviewed this and we found new opportunities, and that's why we can now do something different than we had thought before. And this process until Paris is not the end of the road. It's probably a long-term process until all of these measures are implemented, that we are in a low-carbon economy. So the INDC process will, or may not be called that way, but the process of revising national climate policies, that will go on for quite a while.
Great, thank you. Yamil, did you want to add to that, or do you kind of?
Yes, just quickly. Yeah, they are complementary process. One is the international negotiations and the agreement that will dictate a lot of what happens at the national level, but in parallel, countries are already not waiting for the outcomes, and they're already thinking beyond Paris and trying to come up with some ideas on what they will put in place in the countries to continue this discussion. And one of the things, as Nicholas mentioned, is countries are already thinking is how ambitious we are and how realistic the contributions are in terms of implementing them, and what kind of implementation plan, if to call it that way, would be needed to then make them happen in reality.
Great, thank you. And then another one that is directed at Nicholas, and the question is, how did you capture the information that co-benefits can motivate ambitious INDCs, specifically air pollution and health co-benefits, and from which government bodies? So maybe just a little bit about the methodology of the survey and the research.
Exactly. We interviewed the government representatives of the different countries, and mainly those were those that were participating in the UNDP or workshops, the UNDP workshops on INDC preparation. So it's those that are, usually those government representatives that are responsible or engaged in preparing the INDCs in the country, and they basically then said, yes, this helps. And the example that I showed is Dominican Republic, where you can see in the INDC document, they show these numbers of co-benefits. So in this case, they've used it internally, but they've also used it to then communicate that in their INDC document.
Thank you. And then I'd like to go back out to the audience. We have a colleague by the name of Mauricio who has a question that I think I will unmute him and he can just pose it to the panelists himself. Mauricio, are you there? Maybe he is not. Mauricio? Nope. Okay. So maybe I will just go ahead. I'm going to actually move up to a different one because if he's not there, then he won't be listening. So this is a question that's more on the technical side, but could you please give us some example of types of mitigation contributions that fall under the decarbonization indicator category? Is that something that you would be able to do, Nicholas?
Yes, sorry, that may have been a bit cryptic. What we had in there is emissions per GDP as one. But you could envision that countries use different indicators, but that basically was the indicator that is captured there. So emissions per GDP. Great,
thank you very much for that clarification. And looks like we have a couple other like very technical questions in terms of review of the INDCs. This is an interesting, I think interesting to have you both weigh in on this. We have a question from a colleague, Ivan, who asks, how much will the current currency situation, the dollar and the euro being so strong compared to developing countries' currencies, and the oil and commodities price affect the level of ambition and of unconditioned scenarios? Would either of you like to weigh in on this? I know it can probably come from a more personal level, but or subjective level, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I can try to answer that. I think the future emission level and the future ambition level is dependent on many things. So one is indeed electricity, energy prices, oil prices, but also exchange rates. Those are the two you mentioned. Other ones are general economic development. Yet other ones are technology development. We see, for example, that renewables are much faster than we expected them for years. We see that electromobility is taking off faster than we had expected. So there's different things that are unknown about the future, and that's why I think, well, all of the projections that countries will have made will prove wrong in the end, and that's why we have to revise and regularly monitor this and maybe change the ambition level or the level that can be done regularly. Important not to have it as a one-off thing, but to do that very regularly. And the proposals on how often you have to do that range from each year to every 5 years or every 10 years. That's the spectrum of revision that has to happen. And yeah, I fully agree, and I would hope actually, now seeing that all of the INDCs, if you add them up, are not yet compatible with 2 degrees, the goal of the UNFCCC, I would hope that this regular review finds that, oh, we have not seen that there's certain technological developments that basically may to reduce emissions, and that we can go a bit further. And I would hope that that would happen during the review process.
Great, thank you, Nicholas. We're actually getting to the end of the webinar, so I would like to, at this point, ask both of the panelists if you either have any kind of concluding remarks or anything that you'd like to say in the lead up to Paris, kind of what's expected, although you've already mentioned some of that, but any closing remarks for the audience or ways forward, what we're anticipating.
Thank you, Alison. No, just to add that I personally think this is one of the most exciting times in the 21 years of negotiation in climate change. Hopefully, we will reach an agreement that will be ambitious enough to reach the 2-degree no more than 2-degree increase in temperature, but also as an opportunity to have all parties contributing to some degree based on their own capacities to this agreement. The fact that countries are coming forward in some cases with in a number of developing countries with some ambitious contributions so far, I think shows a signal that countries have brought climate change to the highest levels of priority. They're not being looked at in isolation from the development concerns at the country level, and we've seen more and more the linkages between how climate change impacts development, and that actions need to be taken now, that we cannot wait for 20 more years to begin the process, and that in spite of all this rush into submitting the INDCs, we have the we can call it the luxury of now a 5-year period before INDC starts being implemented, for countries to have a much more thorough discussions about what is needed in terms of capacity, resources, coordinations, technologies, etc., to start the real actions. And I find this very, very encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamil, for the enthusiastic and sobering message. Nicholas, did you have any closing remarks that you wanted to add?
Yeah, same here actually. I'm also excited about this process. It's really the first time all countries come forward with their very specific and nationally determined actions, what they want to do. And this really has accelerated national climate change policy making. We'll still have to see what will be in there and how they will be implemented, but we can already say now that this has had an impact going beyond the mere INDC documents. So that's very, very good to see, and I'm hopeful that that will continue until we have the Paris conference. The last thing is that the presentation that I showed here, as we said before, will be use it and share it, and I would really hope it would help those countries that are still in the preparation process, that it can help them in doing so. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So yes, just to close, I'd like to remind everyone, just as Nicholas said, the presentation and this recording will be uploaded to the website. And as he mentioned, his presentation is actually a tool which has a number of notes in the sections and is encouraged to be shared and studied. There's some hidden slides that give more description than what he was able to present in the time that was given. So please go ahead and look at that presentation and share it among your colleagues as necessary. Also, there are a number of questions that we actually didn't get to during this 30-minute question and answer session. So if those questions are still burning, we invite you to send them to the LECV general email. That's the one on the bottom of the screen, the lowemission@undp.org, and we will make sure that they're filtered out to either Yamil or Nicholas as necessary, so that they can go ahead and address the questions that you have. And so with that, I would like to thank everyone who has attended. It's nice to see all the names pop up and to see the interest in such an important topic. And I would also like to extend our gratitude to the two panelists who made this possible and shared such comprehensive and interesting information. So thank you, and we look forward to hearing more from all of you on the road to Paris. Have a good evening, day, all of the above. Thanks again. Bye.